You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. I told you to stay away from him, Kara, God. Sandra did not hold back, and there was an almost tangible disappointment in her voice, like a cold breath of winter wind burning her skin. Her eyes glittered with stern judgment, and her thin fingers, slightly trembling, were clenched into fists. This tension in every line of her figure only emphasized how seriously she took her words. But all these details were no longer important. Everything she could say was insignificant compared to how deeply I blamed myself. Her reproaches, which now sounded so sharply and abruptly, like blows to a sore spot, I had already told myself all this 1,000 times. Each of her words, bitter and sharp, like a splinter, had already managed to pierce deeply into my consciousness before it came out of her lips. A week has passed since that ill-fated date in the parking lot. That night, realizing what I had done, I pushed Richard out of the car in a rage. His soothing words did not reach my ears. Having somehow gathered myself together, I rushed home. "Damn, Kara! Damn! Damn! Damn!" I screamed at myself, hitting the steering wheel with my fists, as if this could relieve the pain and despair that was tearing my soul apart. Tears flowed down my cheeks in hot streams, blurring my eyes and blurring everything that was ahead. The road in front of me seemed like a complete fog, merging into a single spot of light and shadow. But I had to go. I needed to get home. Home to her husband as to the last refuge, where there was still a shadow of hope. At the next traffic light, when the red light forced me to stop, I automatically lowered the visor and looked into the small mirror. In his reflection, a woman I barely recognized looked back at me. The face, distorted by pain, seemed completely alien. The tousled hair that now fell haphazardly over her shoulders added even more chaos to the look. The eyes, red and swollen, seemed to remind us of how many tears had been shed in this short period of time. A thin, trembling line of lips barely restrained a new attack of sobs that threatened to break out again. Even worse was the sexual satisfaction I felt. Instead of being euphoric, I felt like a traitor who had crucified my husband. No, that's wrong. He didn't take this pleasure. I gave it to him myself. Like an ordinary woman of easy virtue. That's exactly how it was. Cheater, a woman of easy virtue, depraved wife. Whatever you call it, it all sounds equally bitter and humiliating. My actions did not change from my words, and the essence remained the same. No matter how I tried to find an excuse, it was only self-deception, an empty attempt to hide from the truth that pierced me through and through, leaving painful scars on my conscience. Everything was decided the moment I allowed it to happen. I became a woman who betrayed her husband, and this mark is now imprinted on me like an indelible stain. Luckily for me, Tom was not home when I returned. A quiet emptiness reigned in the hallway, and this peace was like a relief, like a brief moment stolen from fate before a storm. I didn't look back, didn't check to see where he might be. I just used this unexpected luck to try to erase everything that reminded me of what happened. I walked into the bathroom, feeling my hands shaking, and trying not to look at myself in the mirror, I quickly took off my tear-stained makeup. Washing it off, it was as if I were erasing traces of guilt and pain from my own face, hoping that cleansed skin would be able to hide this betrayal from everyone who would look at me. Then she straightened her clothes and smoothed her tousled hair to give herself at least a little of her usual appearance, as if nothing had happened. This cleansing ritual was like a desperate attempt to hide the truth, not only from Tom, but also from herself. "What are you going to do?" Sandra's question pulled me out of my thoughts and brought me back to the present. Her worried face and expression of sympathy almost made me cry again. "I don't know, Sen." "Well, I hope you're not going to do something as stupid as tell him about it." "I can't hide it, Sen. I can't lie to him. This is killing me." She reached across the table and squeezed mine. "Honey, I hate to tell you this, but you're already lying to him." This answer broke my last barrier. Loud sobs burst out of me, and I burst into tears like a death row prisoner. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze, and everyone turned their attention to our table. This made me cry even louder. Ma'am, Are you okay? The waiter appeared out of nowhere. Surely he was sent to calm a crying woman who was spoiling the calm atmosphere for the rest of the visitors. Nothing disturbs the peace more than a crying woman. "Hey, Jack," Sandra said after reading his badge. She then pulled out a $50 bill and put it in his pocket. "Make sure no one disturbs us and give us some privacy, okay?" He nodded at his new wealth and walked away. "Listen, Kara," she said when he left. "You won't do anyone any good if you tell me about this. What's done is done. If I were you, I would draw conclusions and move on." "Why didn't I listen to you, Sandy?" I groaned, heavily lowering my head into my hands, as if hiding it from the whole world, as if this way I could hide from both pain and shame. Sandra, sitting next to me, gently stroked my shoulder. Her hand was warm and soothing, and this touch seemed to break through the icy barrier between me and reality. I cried, unable to stop myself, and every sob reminded me that something irreversible had happened. This question was key, wasn't it? Why couldn't I resist? Why did I allow temptation to take over my reason? I knew about the risks. I saw where this could lead. I heard Sandra's warnings ringing in my head like a quiet but persistent alarm. I was warned, but I did it anyway. Whether I tell Tom or not, I will still have to live with it, deal with the consequences, with this weight that now lies on my soul, squeezing it like a steel hoop. A few minutes later, when my tears finally dried up, I was able to raise my head. I felt exhausted, as if the storm inside me had momentarily calmed down, leaving behind emptiness and a feeling of hopelessness. After several quiet sobs, I gathered my courage to finally say what had been in my head for a long time. "I have to tell him," I finally said, my voice sounding dull, but there was a note of determination in it, as if my life depended on this decision. Sandra looked at me with an expression of deep sympathy and understanding, but slowly shook her head, saying nothing. Her gaze was full of doubts and regret, but she was silent, knowing that the decision had been made and her words would not change anything. We finished our lunch in almost complete silence. I moved my fork around the plate, lost in my grief, as if every other thought and every movement was too heavy. Sandra seemed to feel my pain and did not try to distract me, allowing me to experience it alone. But despite her silent encouragement, she still had a question that she needed an answer to, a question that was in her eyes but had yet to leave her lips. "I need to know, Kara. Was the sex at least good?" The guilty look on my face told her everything she needed to know. She sighed and shook her head with a sad smile. "So good, huh? Well, if I were you, I wouldn't tell Tom about this." "Tom. Tom, what's wrong with you lately? You're really depressed," Mom said when she brought Sam. "It's all because of Kara, Mom. She's acting strange. This worries me a lot." "What do you mean weird?" She lowered her voice and sat down on the sofa, noticing that there might be extra ears in the house. Kara wasn't there, yet she was late at work, but my sons were at home. At that moment, as if on cue, Dean walked past us into the kitchen. Seeing Mom on the sofa, he politely greeted, "Hello, Grandma." Mom answered him in a tone usually used with strangers, "Hi, Dean." My son walked to the refrigerator, grabbed the snack he needed, and quietly left. As soon as he was out of sight, my mother turned to me. "So, what did you want to say?" But by that point, I didn't want to talk about Kara anymore. I was angry with her. Perhaps my irritation was influenced by the anger I felt towards Kara moreover. Most likely it was so. When a person is angry, everything that happens around only intensifies this feeling. But now all my rage was directed at my mother. "Why are you treating him like this?" I burst out. Mom looked stunned. "What are you talking about, Tom?" "I know that we should all respect our parents. I understand this perfectly, but something in me switched. I'm talking about Dean. To my son, why are you treating him like a stranger?" "Tom, he's not." This is where my anger erupted like a volcanic torrent. "I swear to God, if you finish that damn sentence, I will kick you out of here and tell you to never come back." Her mouth snapped shut, and she stared at me in complete shock. I never yelled at my mother or used profanities in her presence. Never. That's just not what they do. Her eyes filled with tears, and my anger began to fade. I was still angry, but I was able to calm down a little. Mom, I love you. Is it true? But I'm tired of you singling out Sam so openly. Both of them are my sons. I love them equally, and I won't let you continue this attitude towards Dean. Tom, you can't expect me to treat Dean the same way I treat Sam. Like a family member. I know you love him, but you can't force me to treat him like one of my own. Her tears rolled down her cheeks, and it tore my heart, but my next decision destroyed it completely. Then you will have to leave. Don't pick Sam up from school again. If I want to see you, I will come myself. But I won't let you treat my son like a second-class citizen anymore just because you have a problem with what his father did. It's my responsibility to protect my children, even if it means I have to protect them from you. At the mention of her father, her face changed. A look of anger flashed across him. Then she looked even more devastated than before. Tom, she said in a weak, helpless voice. But there were no more words left between us. She saw it in my eyes. Go, Mom. Please just leave. She rose from the sofa as if with the weight of the world on her shoulders. She turned to go to the door. With every step she took, it became more and more difficult. When she was almost there, her body began to shake with sobs. Damn it, Mom. Why did you make me do this? When she got to the door, she turned and looked at me with sadness in her eyes. You should always be a hero, Tom. You can't live without it. Do you think this makes me happy, Mom? She just shook her head and walked out of my house, closing the door behind her. What a hero I am. Everything at home became cooler, as if along with the warmth that invisible thread that had previously connected us had disappeared. Kara's behavior changed, but not in the direction I expected. She was no longer the passionate wife she had become for a short time. All her brightness, emotion, and ardor seemed to fade away. Now she resembled a fragile shadow of herself oppressed, as if broken by some invisible burden. She moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding my gaze, silent and distant, as if she had taken a vow of silence. Her silence weighed on me like a heavy blanket covering both of us. Kara answered only direct questions, briefly, monosyllabically, and nothing more. There was no previous sparkle in her eyes, and even the smile that sometimes flashed seemed strained, empty. I tried to reach her, tried to talk, asked questions about work, boss, colleagues, hoping to somehow involve her in the conversation. But her answers were restrained, barely warm, as if rehearsed. She reluctantly said the boss was taking time off to deal with personal matters and assured employees it was unrelated to the investigation involving him and Norman. This statement should have calmed them down, but her voice sounded dull, as if she herself didn't believe it. I took his departure as a silent admission of guilt, as an attempt to hide, collect my thoughts, cover my tracks while I still could. Besides this, she remained absolutely silent, as if her emotions had gone into some invisible inner world where I had no access. For me, her silence meant one thing. She didn't want to tell me anything. I waited, hoping that she would open up, that maybe at night, under the cover of darkness, she herself would tell what was troubling her. But nothing. Absolute silence. She seemed to retreat further and further into herself, and I could only watch as she built an impenetrable wall between us. This silence only added fuel to the fire of my anger. I knew that she was hiding something, that there was some secret related to her work, something that perhaps she was trying to hide so as not to hurt me or to protect herself. My attempts to find out the truth, to understand it, to become closer, only resulted in me feeling how she was moving away even more, going into deep defense. The harder I tried to get to the truth, the more Kara closed herself off, refusing to admit that something was gnawing at her, that there was some kind of struggle going on inside her. And the more she was silent, the more angry I became. The angrier I became, the more rapidly she moved away, plunging into her quiet, painful detachment. I saw how she answered in monosyllables, how she lowered her eyes, and the familiar, prickly word sounded in my head, nothing. All men know that the most dangerous word you can hear from a woman is that colorless and chilling nothing. What's happened? Nothing. I understood this as a hidden threat, as a disguised, something important that I may or may not tell you about when I decide, if I decide. But from these nothings, a cold wind seemed to sweep through the house, and my anger only grew. There were too many nothings, and this cold calmness of her answer to my questions deprived me of peace. Every day I became more and more irritable. It was unbearable to know that something invisible and heavy was hanging over us, but could not be spoken about, like a shadow hiding in the corner of the room. This feeling of an invisible threat only added fuel to the fire, fueling more and more irritation in me. It became increasingly difficult to hide my emotions. They, like poisonous moisture, gradually seeped into every corner of my life, infecting everything they touched. Our feelings are fluid. This is both a blessing and a curse. They do not remain only in one part of the soul, just as water does not remain only in one corner of the room where it was spilled. They break through attempts to contain them, like water that they try in vain to lock in a closed room. The longer I tried to hold them in, the more they accumulated, and one day they began to seep out from under the door, spreading into other rooms of my life at work, at communicating with friends, at any business that I touched. These emotions, like insatiable moisture, permeated the floor, dripped down, penetrating deeper and deeper, as if corroding the wood of the foundation of my peace. I understood that if I didn't pay attention to them, they, like water left on a tree, would begin to destroy the foundation of my life, which was cracking at the seams. It was a natural but painful truth. Our emotions are too powerful to be confined to the areas where they originate. When a person is happy and full of life, he seems to glow from within, and this warmth almost always spreads to others. He, as a rule, willingly shares this light, and his joy is reflected on the faces of those around him, like sunlight on water. This internal positive charge, as if with invisible threads, connects him with the people around him, enhancing his good mood, attracting smiles and goodwill. Happiness acts as a magnetic force that attracts others to it, making them treat it warmer, more attentive, and more willing to be around. But the same thing, alas, is true for negative emotions. Bitterness, rage, resentment, guilt, all this does not remain inside, but slowly flows out, like poison seeping through a thin film. Suppressed anger fills the space around a person like smoke, making the atmosphere tense and heavy, making others feel uncomfortable. And because people often, almost instinctively, focus on the negative emotions can spread even faster than we would like. This internal poison, like an infection, invisibly spreads to everyone who is nearby, penetrating their perception, distorting it, like a dark spot on clear water. Anger, resentment, and guilt are transmitted to others along an invisible chain, becoming part of their own emotional background, and therefore the hardships of one person can easily become a source of anxiety and tension for everyone around. My budding resentment towards Kara, as might be expected, did not remain just between us. This heaviness that was poisoning our relationship began to seep into other areas of my life, like a widening crack that threatened to destroy the entire foundation. I noticed how it affected my interactions with my sons, poisoning our moments that used to be full of warmth and understanding. Little things that I had not paid attention to before began to irritate me to the extreme. I suddenly began to notice shortcomings in their behavior. I became too strict and sometimes unfair. Even their usual laughter, which used to warm my heart, began to irritate me, reminding me that I no longer felt that peace next to Kara. This growing shadow of dissatisfaction pervaded my work, like a thick fog that made it difficult to concentrate. Every task, every conversation with colleagues seemed difficult and exhausting. My mother's bias towards Sam began to irritate me especially. Previously, I turned a blind eye to this, but now her attitude seemed to touch my wound even deeper and became unbearable. At some point, I decided to remove her from the lives of my sons, as if cutting off one of the reasons that caused me internal pain. I began to react to everything around me with the same anger and irritation that I had accumulated towards Kara. My emotions spread like overflowing water, flooding every corner of my life. I began to treat even my friends and colleagues with suspicion and resentment, as if each of them could somehow remind me of what was happening in my own home. I once had a sober thought during an argument with Dean about trash. One of Dean's duties was to take the trash out to the curb the night before. As happens with teenagers, he forgot about it. He came up to me when he remembered his mistake and apologized for his inattention. But due to the growing tension and stress, my reaction was completely disproportionate to his offense. Dean, how many times do we have to discuss this? I'm tired of repeating the same thing over and over again. Dad, I understand. Sorry. But you don't have to attack me like that. Just because you and Mom can't communicate properly doesn't mean you need to take it out on me. To say that I was stunned is to say nothing. My next reaction was full of anger. Who are you talking to, boy? Choose your words when you talk to me. Understood? Now get out of here so I can't see you. Dean's jaw dropped and his eyes filled with horror. Sammy also looked up from the game he was watching and had the same look of worry on his face as he looked at Dean and me. Dean had tears on his cheek before he ran out of the room like it was on fire. Later that night, I lay in bed replaying that terrible moment in my head over and over again. I have never swore at my children before. Never. The look of absolute horror on my sons' faces will haunt me for the rest of my life. What made me so angry? He's forgotten to take out the trash before, but I've never reacted like that. Usually I was just annoyed. He put him in a corner and forced him to do push-ups. But I never spoke to him so disrespectfully as at that moment. What was wrong with me? Just because you and Mom can't communicate properly doesn't mean you need to take it out on me. This is the epicenter of my problem, so obvious that even a child could notice it. And for his insight, he received a reprimand. A good father, nothing to say. What a hero I am. When Kara finally went upstairs to go to bed, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. Enough with the evasions and omissions. It's time to deal with this. And so I began. I saw everything, I said simply. She turned to me, looking puzzled. What? Have you seen me? What are you talking about? I looked her straight in the eyes. She started to get nervous under my intense gaze, but I didn't blink. I saw you in the parking lot. You saw me in the parking lot. She began to repeat my words, but gradually the meaning began to dawn on her. These words penetrated her consciousness. Her eyes widened as she realized what I was talking about. Yes, Kara, I saw you in the parking lot, I repeated, and then he added, so that there was no doubt, I saw you having sex. The room fell silent as the new reality began to settle in our minds. She looked at me with horror, and her eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled, but she could not utter a word. I watched my wife literally fall apart before my eyes. I constantly felt that you were hiding something from me, that some kind of invisible barrier had arisen between us. Your behavior has recently become strange, even distant. You avoided my questions about work, brushed them aside as if nothing important was happening there, as if they were trifles unworthy of my attention. But I knew that wasn't the case. I saw you coming home later and later, with a tired, somewhat distant look, but I could not find any reasonable explanation for where you were and what delayed you. Your words sounded unconvincing, like premeditated excuses, and this made suspicion grow inside me. And then there was that night when you suddenly, as if forgetting about everything, attacked me with such passion that I could not understand where this energy, this impulse came from in you. It was like you were a different person, and the change confused me. Then I started to think that something was happening to you, but you never let me know the truth. These inexplicable changes only increased my worries and suspicions. So I started watching you more carefully, paying attention to the little things, trying to put them together into a picture that would give me answers. I realized that something is going on at your work, something that you don't want to tell me about. The decision came naturally. The next time you are late and again remain unclear where, I will try to find you. I wanted to know what was hidden behind this wall of silence that you erected between us. Tom, please let me. I didn't even think you were cheating on me, I continued, not allowing her to get a word in edgewise. I knew that something was happening, that a new factor had appeared in your life that was disturbing you, and I understood that it might have something to do with another man. But I sincerely believed that there was some explanation that would not destroy our marriage. I wasn't going to listen to her excuses. I didn't even want to hear her voice. This was my moment. Now she will listen to me. There will be dialogue later, if there is one at all. I continued, feeling the words cut my throat like blades, but saying them anyway. I thought that maybe some man had caught your attention. Eventually, it happens. People can flirt, look for something new just for the sake of interest, without putting meaning into it. I assumed that this might just be a light flirtation, something fleeting that would soon pass and be forgotten. I never would have thought that it could go so far. My voice wavered, and I had to stop to gather my strength. The words stuck in my throat, as if I were trying to say something unspeakable, something that should not exist. I tried to finish, but I couldn't, as if these words, these terrible words, "you cheated on me," sounded in a foreign language, in some kind of nightmare, where to say them was to acknowledge a terrible reality. I felt them bursting inside me, but my mouth simply refused to form them, as if these words did not exist in any language in the world. I felt a veritable storm of repressed emotions welling up within me, like thunder echoing through my mind, a growing force that I could no longer contain. Since I learned the truth, I have tried with all my might to suppress this pain, to lock it deep inside, as if driving it underwater. I tried not to think, not to feel, not to react. But sometimes, when I don't know what to do, I just choose to do nothing. This is my flaw, my way of coping with what I really can't cope with. When I am faced with a situation that is too difficult for me, instead of taking action, I tend to withdraw into my mind, endlessly scroll through possible scenarios, analyze and relive everything over and over again. It's a vicious circle. Thoughts run in the same circle over and over again until they fill my entire mind, leaving no room for anything else. And I know that it's useless. I know that thoughts don't solve anything, but I just can't stop. And so I found her, but didn't say anything, stood as if paralyzed, waiting. I hoped that she would open up on her own, that she would admit the truth, reveal everything, and maybe try to restore what now seemed so fragile. I waited for her to decide to confess, to take the first step so that we could start over. But nothing. Absolute silence. She still kept her secret, hiding behind a wall of lies and excuses, and this cold silence, this stubborn silence of hers became unbearable. At some point, when I realized that this void between us would never be filled with her words, everything that I had been holding inside suddenly burst out. Pain, rage, resentment, it all poured out like a shaken soda bottle that shoots foam, bursting out of the neck and overwhelming everything around. I felt the emotions that I had been holding back for so long surge with such force that I could no longer control my words or my pain. "How could you do this to me, Kara? How could you go and sleep with another man?" These words came out of me like a scream of anger, pain, and despair, like a long-held hurricane that had finally found its way out. I screamed, and every sound seemed to burn my throat, and there were already tears in my eyes that I could no longer hold back. Sobbing, almost choking from the outburst of emotions, I could barely stand on my feet. Kara rose from the bed and, stepping uncertainly, moved towards me, as if she wanted to console me, somehow ease my suffering, as if her touch could erase the pain that she herself had caused. But her attempt only fueled a new attack of rage in me. "Don't even come to me. Don't you dare touch me." I took a step back, holding my hand out in front of me, pointing at her, as if her approach burned me. Her face contorted with pain and confusion, and she froze in place, as if confused, not knowing what to do. "You're welcome, Tom. I beg you." She begged, her voice trembling and tears shining in her eyes. She extended her hand, as if she was trying to close the distance separating us, as if she wanted to hug me, cuddle me, as she once did, and express her love. But at that moment I asked myself a painful question. Had she ever loved me, or was it just an illusion? "I was waiting, you know." I began, but my voice trembled again, and my throat was so tight that it was difficult to speak. "I was waiting for you to say something. What are you confessing? That you might say you're leaving if that's really what you want, or that you're sorry, that you are sorry, that you are ready to work on us, on everything that we have created for so many years, that you will try to fix everything. Do you understand? I. The words broke off, and I felt this whole whirlwind of emotions cover me completely, leaving no strength. I realized that I could not stay in this house a minute longer. With every second, the walls seemed to be closing in around me, pulling me into a sticky swamp of pain and disappointment. To leave this thought pulsed in my head as the only rational way out, the only sober idea in the whirlpool of emotions tearing me apart from the inside. I needed a fresh stream of air. I needed a space that would separate us and give me at least a little clarity. I walked over to the chest of drawers and with impetuous determination began to pull clothes out of the drawers, barely aware of what I was taking. At that moment, it didn't matter to me what kind of things I grabbed, not the colors, not whether they matched. I simply mechanically grabbed a shirt, some pants, boots, all this turned into a symbol of my escape, into the only thing that could take me away from here. Tom, where are you going? Kara's voice trembled. She seemed to not believe that all this was really happening. I turned away, gritting my teeth, forcing myself to ignore her words as if they were a dull echo from afar. To answer would mean plunging back into the conversation, once again being in front of her eyes, and perhaps giving in to her pleading gaze. But I couldn't, I didn't want to talk. Not now. I simply buttoned my shirt, quickly laced my shoes, and every movement brought me closer to the exit. The only thing that mattered now was the distance that I had to put between us, as if this distance could restore me to the lost peace, at least for a moment protecting me from pain. But she didn't back down. I felt her hand on my shoulder as she tried to turn me around to face her. Tom, we need to talk. My reaction was so sudden that I was even stunned by it. I turned around sharply and pushed her hand away with force. Don't touch me, Kara. Get away from me, you small woman. She stumbled back, clutching her wrist. I stood there, breathing heavily, looking at her with rage and disgust. She looked at me with fear, but soon the fear gave way to pain. Finally, she obeyed my words and left the room. When I finally got dressed and was ready to leave, I found her in the living room. Kara sat on the sofa, slouched, as if the weight that had fallen on her was unbearable. Her face was flooded with tears, and her hands, as if not knowing what to do with themselves, helplessly clutched her wrist, which was white with tension. For a moment, our gazes met just a few seconds, but they reflected the abyss that had become between us. It seemed that I was looking at a complete stranger, in whose eyes I could no longer be reflected. This ironic realization resonated with pain in her chest. Her gaze was just as empty, distant, and in it, as in a mirror, one could read the same alienness as mine. I found it difficult to find the words that now sounded in the silence of this room, like the words of a stranger. I'll live with my parents, I said, and my own voice seemed foreign to me. I'll leave the phone on if you really need something. But please don't call unless absolutely necessary. Everything inside tightened, and despite the pain, I needed this distance, this pause to comprehend what was happening, give myself time to think, and at least regain some composure. Deep down, I expected her to try to stop me. Isn't this what many women do in similar situations? The man leaves, says he needs space, and they grab their last hope, say something, do everything possible to keep him. But Kara didn't do it. She didn't say a word in response, didn't object, didn't try to explain herself. She just continued to stare at me silently, clutching her wrist so tightly as if it might be her last support. Okay, she finally said, her voice sounding quiet, strangled, almost inaudible. That was all she said. No pleas, no attempts to stop me, no tearful requests to stay at least for a while to listen to her version, to hear her explanations. No promises that she would wait for me, no matter how long I needed. Just a short spare, okay. Her words, so cold and final, echoed with emptiness in my soul, leaving behind a strange feeling. I was waiting for something else, maybe at least some hint of resistance, of a desire to hold me, but instead I received only this dry consent, and her look, which reflected nothing but quiet despair and suppressed guilt. I turned around and, without looking back, slowly closed the door behind me, leaving her and our entire house behind. At that moment, the air outside seemed cold and empty, but despite this, I continued to walk, as if my every movement had its own weight and significance, as if I was leaving behind not just a house, but the whole life that was once mine. It's so expensive. Black. I sat on the couch and watched Tom leave. I still couldn't believe he hit me. Yes, he didn't hit me in the face or hit me directly, but he still pushed me, and it hurts a lot, in many ways. Before he left, he looked like he expected me to beg him to stay. But I already tried to do this. And what did this lead to? He had no time for talking. There is no time for a calm discussion without bitterness and mutual reproaches. Who was I trying to fool? Of course, he was not ready to talk. After all, he just found out that I slept with another man. No, even worse, he himself seen me having sex with someone else and allowed this knowledge to accumulate in himself for several weeks. Looking back, I realized that he was trying to get me to talk all along. He made attempts to provoke at least some kind of response, but I was afraid. It's funny, after talking with Sandra, I decided to tell him everything. But when it came down to it, I chickened out. I allowed fear to convince me that this was not the right time, and waited for the right moment, as if there was a perfect time to admit to cheating. The irony is that he knew everything from the very beginning, so every moment was right. But every day that passed made this confession less and less correct. Finally, I moved from the couch to the kitchen to get some ice for my wrist. When I returned to the living room, I saw Dean at the top of the stairs. He was watching me. Oh God, how much of this has he seen? How much did he hear? "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked carefully. I tried to smile as calmly as possible to reassure him. I wasn't sure how successful I was. He looked far from calm. "I'm fine, honey. It just fell on my wrist. Everything will be fine. Why aren't you in bed?" My attempt to distract him didn't work. He completely ignored my question about why he wasn't sleeping. It was really stupid. He didn't even have a fixed bedtime. Will Dad come back? Crap. How should I answer this question? He just came out, Dean. You really better go to bed. Don't lie to me, Mom. Just tell me the truth. Will my dad come back or not? His sudden outburst scared me. Dean wasn't a kid who showed much emotion. He had almost no difference in intonations of joy, sadness, anger, and sarcasm. But now his pain and fear were so deep that they could no longer hide. "I don't know, son." His shoulders sagged as if a huge weight had fallen on them. Then he slowly turned around and, without raising his feet, walked back to his room. Oh God, what have I done? A week later, I sat at my desk and watched as my former boss, was escorted out of the area by security. In his hands was a pathetic box of personal belongings. As he passed my desk, he stopped and looked at me. His gaze was cold, his eyes full of rage. "I know it was you who set me up. Norman said that you visited him the day before the company decided to audit me. You and that bastard Mueller set me up. I knew he had his teeth on me after that stupid bitch quit." I couldn't resist, and, trying to annoy him, I made a naive smile and batted my eyelashes. "James, how can you say that? Throwing false accusations when you are expelled is not the most dignified way to leave." He leaned down so that our eyes were at the same level. His mouth twisted into an evil grin, and his cold gaze pierced right through me. He was so close that he had to speak in a whisper. "I know it was you and him because I saw you in the parking lot. They had sex with you in the back seat, like you were some kind of cheap woman." I had neither a sharp response nor a sarcastic comment. For the first time, I was left without words. "So be true. You should have stayed with me. At least I paid you." With these words, he laughed mockingly, and the guards nudged him, making it clear that it was time to leave. A moment later, he was out of sight. Still, his words hung over me like a thick cloud. I sat at the table for a long time, staring into space. It was not the insults that touched me, but the truth hidden in his words. When I came to my senses, I realized that I would be useless at work for the rest of the day. Besides, I had very little to do. The boss was no longer there, and no replacement had yet been found, so I decided to go home. When I arrived at the house, my heart sank. I saw Tom's car standing in its usual place. I didn't know what to expect. Did he come to talk, serve me with divorce papers, or just yell at me again? Maybe he only came to collect some more of his things. I opened the door and entered the house. Everything was in its place, as it had been in the morning. None of Tom's things were missing, which reassured me a little. I found him in the kitchen, sitting and eating a bowl of cereal. I could hardly contain my laughter. Of all the things to eat at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a bowl of Alpha Bits cereal looked childishly adorable, like a 13-year-old boy. My heart was breaking. I loved this man. I really loved him. But here we are. "Hi," I greeted quietly when he noticed me standing in the doorway. I tried to catch his mood, but nothing was visible on his face. No joy, no sadness, no anger. He just looked tired. "Hello." We sat in awkward silence for several minutes. Then I went to the cabinet, took out a bowl, sat down opposite him, and poured myself some cereal. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons on glass bowls and the crunch of chewing. It seems that we both wanted to maintain this sweet silence a little longer. Once it ends, you have to face reality. None of us wanted this. Finally, he put the spoon down and looked into my eyes. "Why, Kara?" Such a simple question. It's a pity that the answer was not so simple. I thought about it all week, alternating between tears and more tears. This was not a question that could be answered in one sentence. There was no reason for me to say, "I did it because." Rather, it was a variety of small reasons and circumstances that created a cocktail that left me vulnerable to cheating. My egoism and self-doubt made up a lot of this cocktail, but my husband also contributed. Honestly, I didn't think he was ready to hear it. But I'm tired of running away from our problems. We've grown apart, Tom. We barely talk. All the things we don't tell each other would be enough to fill the Grand Canyon. His face flushed with anger. "I was trying to get closer to you, Kara. I tried, but you didn't give me a chance. Now it's clear why. All this time you were busy sleeping with that bastard." I tried to remain calm. I didn't want to start a fight with my own rage. "I only slept with Richard once. That was the first and only night we had sex." He snorted contemptuously. "Is it true? And am I supposed to believe this?" He jumped up and began pacing nervously around the kitchen. This time I was smarter and kept my distance from him. My wrist still hurt a little from my last encounter with his hand. "Whether you believe it or not, it's true." His snort sounded more like a bull's snoring. He continued to walk around the kitchen. Of course, he didn't believe me. Lately, I've noticed how little he thinks about me. "I don't expect you to believe me, Tom. Oddly enough, no matter what you said, you always saw her in me." He stopped walking and looked at me with slight bewilderment. I continued. "Lately, every time I do something you don't like, you call me Jasmine. The first time you said that was when we had an argument the day I left work. You implied that the only reason I got the job was because I did lap dances at the interview." "I didn't mean that, Kara." "Is it true? Now, which one of us is lying?" "Black." "No, Tom. Let me tell you. You said enough the night you left. You didn't want to hear a single word I said. Today you came back to find out why I did this. I'm answering your question. If you really want to know, then listen to me." He closed his mouth and looked at me as if weighing his decision. Then he calmly returned to his place and sat down. "Okay, Kara, I'm listening." I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. I tried to arrange them into a neat, coherent list. But all this is chaotically scattered in my mind, like dirty clothes on the floor of a closet. We've just been on different wavelengths lately. I'm not saying it's your fault. We both somehow grew up in different directions. When you lost your job, you became irritable. You were lashing out at me because of your frustration. It got to the point where I was tiptoeing around you. When I found a job before you, things got even worse. The more angry you became, the stronger your contempt for me became because of my past. Kara, he tried to interrupt. "I never despised you. I married you even though I knew you danced. I accepted Dean as my son. I treated you well, despite who you used to be. I smiled bitterly and shook my head. Is it true? Well, Tom, looks like I should be grateful that you took me under your wing, so unworthy. Yes, you really should be grateful, he said, not feeling an ounce of regret. This made me angrier than ever. This time I jumped out of my seat. See, this is exactly what I mean. Your constant, Kara, you should be grateful to me attitude. It's like you're some handsome prince who's come to save a beggar woman from her broken life. So, let me be clear. Yes, I was a dancer, but I did it to take care of my son, and guess what? I would do it again. Moreover, I would do it to take care of you if I had to. Damn it, I've already done this for you, I thought, remembering how I stood in front of James to get my job back. He sat, not finding what to answer, and it was good because I couldn't stop. I got out of that life myself. I didn't get any help from you when I decided to change my life. So, guess what? You didn't save me. You see yourself as some kind of hero to me, and that makes you look down on me. Yes, you are a wonderful person. You didn't pay attention to my past. You love my son as your own. He is my son, he interrupted me again. I nodded. Fine. You love our sons. This makes you a great husband and father, but not my savior. He nodded as if he understood. I sat down opposite him again and reached out to take his hands. But he pulled them away and looked at me in a way that made me feel uneasy. Do you think this justifies what you did? Do you think I looked down on you because you were a dancer and that gave you the right to sleep with another man? I removed my hands and placed them on my lap. You know, this heroism works both ways. Part of the reason I considered you my hero was because you saw yourself that way. From the day you gave me a ride home when my car died, you became the one I could rely on to solve all my problems. You were always the one who saved me. And then when you lost your job, you couldn't be that person anymore. When you stopped being that person, you started looking down on yourself. You began to consider yourself worse as a husband. You started talking down to me because you were having trouble finding a job. You even hinted that now I am the man in our relationship. The truth of his words stunned me. Suddenly, I was aware of my thoughts and actions in a way that I had not been able to before. It was a sobering truth. But he was wrong about one thing. Yes, Tom, to some extent, I really did look down on you. But do you know why? You looked at yourself that way when you couldn't be a hero. You walked around the house gloomy only because there were no more people praising you at work. You spent most of your childhood trying to save your mother from what your father did. When we got married, you took it out on me and Dean. When you could no longer save us, you began to consider yourself less of a man. You stopped believing in yourself. That's when I started to lose respect for you. You forgot that I supported you when you first lost your job. I consoled you. I didn't lose respect for you because you lost your job. But here you are, yes. He looked shocked for a moment. Then his face took on a determined expression, as if he accepted what I said. You're right, Kara. I really lost respect for myself. But you know what? It still doesn't justify what you did. I accepted all your problems associated with being a dancer. You should have done the same for me when I needed it. He was right. After all, he deserved much more than I gave him. I wasn't even going to try to argue with that. At that moment, something changed in the room. It was something elusive, but completely real. I think the best way to describe it is as an understanding, a kind of awareness. It was as if our eyes had been opened, and we saw each other again for the first time in a long time. You know, Kara, this is the first time in a long time that we're actually talking to each other. I smiled bitterly. You are right. How did we get to this point where we can't even talk to each other? Good question. Although I think sleeping with another guy didn't really help, he said, standing up. I knew that my face showed the pain of his words, but he looked at me without apology, despite the expression on my face. I could only shake my head. As soon as we started to move somewhere, he took a step back again. So what now, Tom? Are you going to blame me forever, or are we going to try to fix this? My question was an attempt to lead us to some kind of solution, move forward, but he took it differently. His eyes became colder, and he looked at me with fury. You have the nerve to ask me such questions, woman, as if I was the one who was dishonest with you. Let's not forget that I went through this whole marriage with you. We both suffered, but I was still able to remain faithful, and you changed. So spare me my righteous indignation. I wisely took a step back and considered my next words. Anyway, I started slowly, trying not to sound threatening in my tone. We still need to figure out what to do next. Accusations will not help us understand what to do. I'm not saying you have to forgive me, but we have to sit down and decide what we're going to do. Should I give up everything or fight? Volume. Quit or fight. Either this or that. What does a couple do when they are actually faced with this choice? Those who stand on the sidelines and observe other people's problems always have advice on what to do. These tips always seem so logical. It's so simple. Leave her, brother. No woman is worth such suffering. If my wife did such a thing, she would go to hell. Where is your pride? Be a man. Fight for your marriage. You can't run away at the first test. If my wife did this, I would try to forgive her and support my family. That's what a real man does. Be a man. The problem with this choice is that there is no good solution. Both options are like a sip of bitter poison. Whichever path you choose, you lose. You will always wonder if it would have been better to choose another. Leave her and break your heart. Destroy your family. Go through the lonely agony of trying to recover while maintaining a relationship with your children. But according to society, you are still a man. Fight for your marriage. Experience the excruciating agony of forgiveness and trying to rebuild trust. Go through all the suffering while fighting the demons that have entered your alliance. But again, you are a man. Sigh. Why is being a man so difficult? I decided to fight. We decided to fight. Fight each other. Fight demons. Fight mistrust. But fight for marriage. To be honest, one of the main reasons I decided to fight wasn't because of Kara. Don't get me wrong, I loved her. But she left me with too many scars. Some of them were especially profound. Honestly, it would be much easier to leave her than to try to fix everything. At least in the short term. No, the main reason I decided to stay was Dean. He was my son. No one could dispute this as long as I remained married to Kara. I never officially adopted him. At that moment, it seemed unnecessary. I was married to Kara. There was no other father who could challenge my parental rights, and no one cared about it. But I was afraid that this would change if we got divorced. Dean needed me to be there. But even more, I needed to be near him. Greater love has no one than this, that a man lays down his life for his friends. John, how right you are. Maybe I'm just being dramatic. I put myself in the position of a martyr. I play the role of a hero. We all want to see ourselves as heroes. But the truth was that I loved Kara. I loved Dean and Sam. I loved the memories of our past, of what our family was like before all these misfortunes. If there was even the slightest possibility of returning to those times, I had to try. We had to try. This choice led us to the decision to contact a consultant. We found a good family psychologist and went to see him twice a week. 6 months. I envy stories where all the couple's problems are solved through counseling. The counselor asks insightful questions that really get to the heart of the issue, and the couple discovers hidden truths about themselves and each other. In these sessions, they find a way to rekindle their love. They then leave the final session holding hands and looking into each other's eyes. Moments of epiphany like in a movie. We didn't have that. The biggest problem was that I didn't trust Kara at all. She said it only happened once, that it was just an impulse, that she was carried away by circumstances. But for me, this was not a logical explanation. You can't just get caught up in the moment and sleep with someone. It doesn't happen that way. One moment you're just coworkers with no feelings for each other, and the next moment the car is bouncing because you're having sex in the back seat. I would understand if it was a drinking incident. Suppose it happens that someone gives in to an impulse because of alcohol. It wouldn't make the pain any less acute, but at least it would be understandable. but not in our case. Unless they had a bar right in the office, she was definitely sober that night in the parking lot. No, there is a certain path that leads to someone ending up in you. This pathway may speed up if alcohol is involved, but it still goes through a series of steps. First, the dating stage. This is the moment when a person decides whether another person is attractive to him or not. This may happen on a subconscious level, but it still happens. The next stage is the establishment of mutual feelings. Essentially, you find out if the other person has the same interest in you. Flirting, hints, friendly conversation, all this helps to understand whether he returns your feelings. Then there comes a moment when you understand whether this person is ready to sleep with you. Mutual attraction does not always end in sex. A woman may not want to appear approachable, or there may be other reasons why she does not give in to the impulse. For example, if she is married and does not want to cheat on her husband, she may choose not to go down this path, even if she wants to. When it becomes clear that the other person is ready for intimacy, all that remains is to find the right moment, time, and place. If Kara's explanation is to be believed, all of these steps happened in 5 minutes. They were just walking along, chatting about nothing, and suddenly bam, and they were already in the back seat. It always kills me. No matter how long I have left to live, I will never be able to forget this sound. This sound came through the closed car door, the chirping of insects and several tens of meters of open space. But I still heard it. And then watching, realizing that my wife was having sex, was unbearable. Knowing that she was enjoying it was truly an emotional death. Call me superficial. Call me insecure. Say it's a matter of a wounded male ego. Tell her I didn't love her enough. No matter how you frame it, I don't care. All I know is I couldn't forget it. And then listening to her try to downplay the impact of this event on her made me skeptical. I remember her dressing up in front of the mirror that morning. Was it related to him? I remember how she suddenly attacked me that night. Did she think about him when she was with me? I remember how she looked down on me for such a long time. Was she comparing me to him all this time? There were no easy answers to these questions. Worse, I didn't trust the answers she was giving me. They seemed superficial, contrived. We are at a dead end. I'm stuck in the purgatory of my mind. We tried for 6 months. Maybe they didn't try enough. Maybe I didn't try enough. Maybe she didn't try enough. Honestly, I thought that since she changed it, she should have tried harder. I couldn't live like this anymore. Maybe I'm just a weakling. I don't know. But I couldn't continue. I couldn't forgive her enough to move on. I couldn't forget. You see, in marriage one is impossible without the other. You can't forgive, but you can't forget. Holding on to the memory of betrayal means not truly forgiving. Trying to get rid of pain by protecting yourself from new pain leads nowhere. To forgive, especially a spouse, you need to truly let go. To do this, you need to open up again and be willing to be hurt again. This is trust. If you don't open up completely, then you're living in a marriage with one foot out the door. Trust but verify is not trust. It means, I don't trust you enough, so I need to be in control. I couldn't live like that, but I couldn't do it any other way with her either. Even after all our efforts, there remained a huge, insurmountable wall between us. I didn't want to live in polygamy where there would always be that damn specter in my relationship with my wife and me. What will be, will be. So this is the end, she said sadly, sobbing and wiping her nose. It was a rhetorical question, considering the papers in front of her. But still I nodded in response. But we tried, Tom. Why do you just have to take everything and throw it away? She burst into tears again. I wanted to console her, but it was inappropriate under the circumstances, at least for me. There is no way to find the right way to serve someone with divorce papers. Sorry, Kara. I can't take it anymore. She took the pen I had placed on the table and quickly signed her name in the correct places. I had to look away. For some reason, I couldn't look at it. Witnessing the moment of the end of a relationship was unbearable. It was like watching a man get hit by a train. A second before the impact, any normal person would instinctively turn away. Well, Tom, I hope this is what you wanted, she said with a hint of resentment in her voice, pushing the signed papers towards me. She gave me one last sad look, stood up, and went upstairs. A moment later, I heard the door of her bedroom slam. What I wanted didn't matter anymore. Everything was as it was. The division of the property was quite simple and straightforward, or so I was told. I don't know how they could call something so painful simple, but it wasn't their hearts that were on the line. To them, it was simply a case based on the wording in the documents that we agreed to, and of course on the small whole amount that we paid them. Kara got the house since the children stayed with her. I had to pay child support and spousal support. This was the only point on which my lawyer was able to negotiate. I would again want to live in those fictional stories where the deceived husband gets a shark of lawyers and a judge without a drop of intelligence who finds a magical loophole in the law that allows the husband to pay nothing. I was given unlimited access to the children. Kara and her lawyer didn't object, and for that I was grateful. And now, after 8 years of marriage to Kara, I was left alone, completely alone. I rented a small 2-room apartment a few miles from their house. It wasn't a bachelor pad, but it wasn't a hole either. The area was quite quiet and well-maintained. It was far from schools, so there weren't many children here. Mostly middle-aged couples, retirees, and divorcing people lived here. I was surprised at how easily I could communicate calmly with Kara when I went to visit the children. The pain from the betrayal still made itself felt, but we were able to cope with most of the bitterness and resentment during sessions with a psychologist. I no longer needed to attack her to feel better. I wasn't mad at her, I just didn't trust her. Same result, but huge difference in how to move forward. We were both suffering, and there was no point in making it worse with pointless arguments and emotional attacks. Therefore, when we talked, there was usually sadness in our voices. Dean suffered the most. Sam suffered too, but in a different way. You see, Sam was confident that I would always be his father. He had no doubts. I was his dad. But Dean kept waiting for me to leave him. During each of our interactions, he watched me carefully, waiting for the moment when I would reject him. He was old enough to realize that he was only considered my son because Kara was my wife, but not old enough to realize that he was still my son regardless. Because of this, I had to be careful about everything I did for both children. I walked on a knife's edge, trying not to do more for Sam than for Dean. People without children might think it's easy, since technically you love all your children equally. But it's not that simple. Every child is unique. You react to each of them differently. There are things you allow one person to do, but you won't allow another. There are things you give to one, but not to another. And then there are times when you have to choose which child to give special attention. It's a difficult balance in any circumstance, and in these circumstances almost impossible. Sam, being younger, naturally demanded more attention. While Kara and I were married, this was not a problem. Dean didn't need me to hug him or call him little every time I saw him. He didn't need such displays of affection. While we were married, everything balanced itself out. One time one of them received more, another time the second one complained, "It's not fair. That's life." But when one parent leaves, you don't have unlimited time to fix the situation. Every visit was like the Super Bowl. I had one chance to get it right. If I was wrong, I would fail until the next meeting. Dean and I had a tradition. We'd grab our bikes, mount them on the trunk of my car, and ride to a trail in the mountains that was a few miles from our house. We tried to go there about once a month, when the weather allowed. There was a simple path and a more difficult one. Since we were experienced cyclists, we chose a difficult route. It was so much fun. Unfortunately, he began to refuse when I offered to go. He made up excuses every time. He began to do this almost always. He answered any of my questions briefly and abruptly. Against this background, he became jealous of Sam. He began to offend his younger brother. Poor Sam couldn't understand why Dean suddenly started treating him so cruelly. Kara tried to talk to Dean, but it only made the situation worse. No matter what we tried, we could not reach him. He was on his way to complete collapse. God, what have we done to our son? Kara, 6 months later. Richard, what are you doing here? I sat at my desk, amazed to see Richard. We haven't seen each other for several months. From that very night in my car. Oh, that night, I tried to pull myself together and stop the butterflies doing somersaults in my stomach. I pushed the sweet memories of that night out of my head and tried not to look like a schoolgirl in love with her idol. Hi, Kara. Nice to see you. I'm fine, thanks for asking. I giggled and brushed a strand of hair out of my face. Sorry, I'm just surprised to see you here. He laughed and nodded. His gaze seemed to penetrate straight into my soul, making me melt. He was so confident in himself, so strong, and so attractive. And it was because of him that you lost your husband. Don't forget about it. I actually went to see your boss to see how he's adapting to his new place. Well, he seems to be coping quite well. If you want my opinion, I will say that he is definitely better than the previous boss. Although James set the bar quite low. All you have to do to be better than him is don't harass me or steal the company's money. Richard laughed. Exactly. By the way, the board of directors has now taken it seriously. Thanks to you, we learned that he and Norman actually embezzled over $600,000. I hope he has a good lawyer. Although, you know what? No, I don't hope so. We laughed together and then suddenly fell silent. He stood looking at me in such a way that I began to lose my mind. I tried to diffuse the situation by talking. I didn't think you personally checked how Mr. Dolphin was doing. Isn't there anyone who could do this for you? He leaned in so close that I could inhale his scent. My heart beat so hard that it seemed like its beat could be heard throughout the entire office. I volunteered myself, and your boss is just one of the reasons I'm here, and there's someone else I want to see underneath me. Attention, attention, anxiety, Richard I. Bean, how are you? He said, interrupting me and heading towards my new boss. He ignored what I was about to say. Not bad, Richard. You know, considering the terrible game Eli put on last night. Richard laughed and patted Mr. Dolphin on the shoulder as if to reassure him. I always feel for Giants fans. You can't always count on good catches to save the game. Wow, Richard. Looks like you still can't forgive the Super Bowl when we beat your precious Patriots. Oh, sorry, cheaters. Funny, Bob. Tell me, how many times have you been back to the Super Bowl since then? They discussed football for another 10 minutes. I stopped listening to them and pretended to work, as I always do when men start discussing sports. It always amazes me how even the smartest man turns into a teenager as soon as his favorite team is mentioned in conversation. While they were talking, Richard pretended I wasn't in the room. They teased each other as if they were alone. Soon they entered the office and closed the door. An hour later, Richard came to my desk again. Kara, I want to invite you to dinner tonight. What time should I pick you up? Richard, as much as I would like to have dinner with you, I can't. There are too many complications between us. It could end badly. He took a deep breath, as if contemplating what to say. What are the difficulties, Kara? You like me, I like you. It's simple. First of all, Richard, you are married. You have a wife and children. Doesn't that bother you? For a moment, he looked like a guilty child. He then sat down on the edge of my desk. Listen, Kara. Yes, I'm married, and I love Gracie, but I can't get you out of my mind. I always remember that night when we made love. Sometimes I even think I smell you. I've missed you ever since. Why does he make everything so difficult? Richard, we can't do this. Kara, he said, taking my hand. I'm just asking for dinner. We don't owe anything. I just want to see you. Let's talk. Richard, don't make me beg. At that moment, my resistance melted away. I knew this was a bad idea. I knew, but I also wanted to see him. Okay, you won. Just one dinner, Richard, and that's it. He smiled widely and stood up. I promise to behave well. Honest scouting. With these words, he put his hand on his heart and raised his other hand. That's not a sign of a scout, promise, I laughed. He laughed too. Okay, well, I've never been a scout. Do you really need to be a scout to be honest? It was so childish and stupid that I couldn't stop laughing. It was nice to laugh. I haven't really laughed for a long time because there was no reason. He's dangerous, Kara. Sandra's warning rang through my head again as I watched him leave. He really was dangerous. When he turned around and gave me one last smiling glance before disappearing from view, I knew I was in trouble. I couldn't deny the attraction and love that overwhelmed me when he was around, and I couldn't forget the night we made love in the back seat of my car. I haven't experienced anything like this for a long time. Besides, what did I have to be afraid of? I'm free now. What about karma? You may not be married, but he is married. This thought stopped me. He was married. He had children, just like it once was for me. Okay, I'll just have dinner with him. Nothing more. If I didn't think about it too much, I could even convince myself of it. We sat in a restaurant in dim light. Soft music filled the air with an atmosphere of peace and romance. I watched as Richard sipped his wine, giving me a flirtatious glance across the table. I'm so glad you agreed to go out with me, Kara. Well, you promised to behave like an honest scout. Technically, I'm not a scout. So what? His voice trailed off as his hand slowly slid across the table to take mine. I didn't pull my hand away. He took this as an invitation and began to gently stroke her with his thumb. So this means you have no honor, I asked with a smile. When it comes to you, no. His eyes were serious, although he was still joking. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Behave yourself, I said with deliberate severity as he pulled his chair closer to me. Stop, Kara. You have to pull yourself together. After all, this is precisely why you are in trouble. But I'm divorced. Why should I stop? Because he's married. Here's why. My conscience made me grab his hand and stop it. I brought her back to his lap. I didn't really want him to stop, but I felt like I should want him to. My internal conflict was tearing me apart. At that moment, I received a message from Tom. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Lately, every call or message from him has caused me this reaction. Every time he contacted me, I hoped that he would say how wrong he was by leaving me. I would give anything to hear that he loves me and cannot live without me. If I thought he was ready to listen to me, I would break the button on the phone, calling him to confess my love. Every time I was disappointed, and this case was no exception. Tom, I want to take the boys for the weekend. Will it fit? I almost vomited. He didn't write to me because he wanted to see me. He was simply communicating plans to spend time with our sons. It seemed like all that mattered to him was maintaining the relationship. And then another inner voice sounded. Why would you make Richard stop? That's why you don't need you anymore. He didn't even try to forgive you and save the marriage. He gave up everything so easily. Did he even want to save his family? The voice of conscience immediately intervened. You are the one who changed. You yourself put the marriage in jeopardy. If Tom did the same, would you forgive him? Yes, I would forgive. I would get angry, yell at him, put him through hell. But I would not give up. I would forgive him because I love him. I damn love him. Kara, are you okay? Why are you crying? I looked up and saw Richard with worry lines on his forehead. His gaze sought an explanation for my sudden sadness. I didn't even notice that I started crying. Sorry, Richard. I'll go to the ladies' room. Excuse me. I didn't wait for his answer. I pushed my chair back and quickly left. Entering the toilet, I calmed down and tried to pull myself together. Tom left. I needed to accept this. He didn't want to fight for us. He didn't love me enough to try to fix anything. I would swallow any humiliation to atone for what I did. But no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough because he didn't want me. I looked in the mirror. There was an attractive woman looking at me who was on a date with a handsome man, and all she could do was cry about her ex. I touched up my lipstick and freshened up my makeup. When I was satisfied with my reflection, I left the toilet to a new person. Richard, can we take the food with us? I asked, returning to the table. He looked at me in surprise. Kara, did I do something wrong? I leaned close to his ear to whisper, I don't want to end this date. I just want to get out of here and do something with you somewhere that is indecent to talk about out loud. He sat there with his mouth open, as if this was the greatest surprise of his life. He blinked a couple of times, silently. Then he beckoned the waiter to our table. Yes. We would like to take our food and the bill away, please. We won't stay. The waiter nodded and left to fulfill the order. I sat down in my seat and enjoyed the sight of Richard. His face reflected a mixture of anticipation and surprise. So confident, but he became like wax when he was being persecuted. Here he is, a lion who has become prey. I pushed thoughts of Tom out of my head and focused on tonight. No more tears. Today I will be carefree Kara. Today I had amazing sex with a man. I was going to spend the night enjoying it as if nothing had happened. Tomorrow problems will come again. I will comfort a teenager who needs his father. I will face the sadness of divorce and being a single mother. I will cry over every commercial Tom and I ever watched together. I'll look at our wedding photos with a box of tissues in my hand. Tomorrow. And today, I'm going to enjoy the moment. As we drove, I noticed that his gaze constantly slid from the road to my feet. I loved the way he looked at my body with lust. I smiled to myself. So where are you taking me, Richard? I asked in a playful tone. To my home. I wondered why he was taking me to his place. That is, I understand why he was doing this, but the question was about his wife and children. Where are they? I doubted he was going to burst into the house and announce that he had a guest with whom he was going to have sex. Sex. What a rude word. But I hoped that it accurately described what awaits us. I didn't ask about his family. The mention of a wife and children could destroy the illusion, so I decided to go with the flow and surrender to Richard's will. We arrived at a gated residential complex with security at the entrance. The employee looked out as Richard rolled down the window. Good evening, Mr. Mueller. Hi, Craig. How are things going? Not bad, sir. I managed to work out a little. The guard looked at me in the salon. His face showed confusion for a moment. He didn't know who I was, but he knew exactly who I was not. Disapproval flashed across his face, but he quickly returned to a neutral expression and disappeared back into the booth. The gates began to open slowly. Have a good evening, Mr. Mueller. Same to you, Craig. Every house we passed was like a miniature mansion. By eye, one could guess that each of these houses cost between $500,000 and $1 million. When we entered his house, I gasped in admiration. I have never seen such a beautiful place. The living room was big enough to fit my entire house in it. He noticed my admiration with slight pride. I let him take off my coat while I slowly took in my surroundings. Then I came across family photos. Judging by the photographs taken several years apart, the family looked happy. I saw Richard standing next to his wife, who, by the way, was incredibly beautiful, and in front of them were their children. His children. His wife. How could I look at these photographs knowing what I was about to do? A better question is, how could I even plan to do this? Hey, beauty, would you like something to drink? I can make you something at the bar. His voice pulled me out of my thoughts. For a moment, it even stunned me. Hearing his voice behind me while his family was in front of me felt surreal. I knew he was married, but seeing evidence of his happy family made everything seem wrong. Tom and I had the same family photos. He stood next to me with the same pride as Richard and his wife. We were once a family. I started to lose confidence. This is a mistake. I shouldn't have been here. I turned around and almost collided with Richard. I didn't notice that he was so close behind. My awkwardness looked like a rush of passion, and he hugged me. Richard. I started to protest, but he leaned over and kissed me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't tear myself away from him. Without a word, he took my hand and led me to his bedroom. In the morning, we got up and went to the shower. After the shower, we got dressed, and he drove me to my car. We exchanged a goodbye kiss, and then I started the engine and drove home. As I stood alone in my car, reality hit me. I was driving home, to the house where Tom was no longer there. The events of last night and this morning were spinning in my head. Many will probably think that this is proof that Richard is better in bed than Tom. But that's not true. Sex is not a numbers game. There were too many conflicts between Tom and I for sex to become a regular thing. I remember how we once made passionate love. The night I kissed Richard, I felt so guilty that I decided to give my husband the best sex we had at that time. God, what a night it was! Once I got over the guilt of my actions, the moment Tom and I shared was so beautiful. We were wonderful. We had sex, but it was something more, available only to husband and wife. Now none of this mattered. He left. Suddenly, I realized how empty I was inside. Despite all the passion of last night, I would rather spend it with my husband. Sorry, with my ex-husband. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.